Hey coin collectors, and welcome to DC Coin World International Coin Channel. Today we have the 1965 nickel, and then we also have these nickels that say 1964 on them. And this is a strange story of the 1964, 1965, and really the 1966 nickels. In 1965, the United States mints were still all making 1964 nickels. In fact, more 1964 nickels were made in 1965 than had been made in any year in history. And that's because Congress put what they called a date freeze on it. And the date freeze of 1965 said that the U.S. Mint could not change the date on these coins until they had produced sufficient quantities for the United States banks and economy to use. One of the things that many coin collectors know about 1965 is that there were no mint marks on the 1965 coin. In 1964, the mint marks had been on the back of the coin, but what Congress said in 1965 was the U.S. Mint was not allowed to put any mint marks on the coins as part of that date freeze. For 1965, 1966, and 1967, there were no mint marks on the coins. They made probably 2 billion 1964 nickels in 1965. Of the 136 million nickels that they made with the year 1965 on them, only 10% of those were made in 1965. The other 90% of these 1965 nickels were made in 1966. And if that isn't confusing enough, it turns out that they did this with all the coins in 1965. So let's talk about these nickels. It has Jefferson on the front or obverse of the nickel and says, "In God we trust" in front of him, liberty behind him. We see the star here, and then the year 1965. And then way down in here, we look for what we know is the FS there on the modern coins for Felix Schlag, and it turns out they hadn't put the initials on it yet. They didn't put the Felix Schlag initials on until 1966. We tip it up on its edge and we see it's a smooth edge coin. These nickels are copper nickel. Some countries call them cupro nickel, and they weigh 5 grams and are 21.2 millimeters in diameter. At the top it says E pluribus unum. At the bottom it says United States of America. 5 cents, Monticello as we go up. And if we look way in here, we see a representation of Thomas Jefferson's home, Monticello. Down in here, we see that this is where the steps would be going into the home. And we see that they're really kind of torn up. If you want to get an expensive 1965 nickel, you're going to need to get some steps on here and hopefully some full steps. But there aren't many of those full steps nickels out there. Let's take a look at the PCGS website and see some of those nickels. So this is the MS66 full steps version from PCGS, and you can see the MS66 right down here. You can see that it has 5 cents FS is full steps regular strike and 1965, and you can tell that this is really a fine coin when we look at the front here and look at the lettering on there and look at the numbers over here, how fine that is. And then when we get over here, we look down and we see that even though it is a full steps version, it's not the clearest steps in the world. It's pretty good, but it's not the clearest steps in the world. And that's all you need to get up close to $40,000 from PCGS. Now, the other version, without the full steps, is still worth about $2,000. Notice no FS up here, but when we look at the numbering and the detail here, still really, really fine numbering and detail here. Great detail over here, but then when we look at the steps, we see that this is clearly not a full steps version, even though it has incredible detail everywhere else. This coin, graded by PCGS at an MS67, is valued at over $2,000. So you can see that our coin here is not going to be worth much money because it doesn't have the full steps, but it also isn't going to be worth the premium on the non-full steps version because you really don't have any detail in the building at all, and the lettering is not as good as you would need for a mint state 66. So this is not going to be a $2,000 no full steps or a $40,000 full steps version. There's one other version of the coin that came out in 1965, and that was the Special Mint Set version. The 1965 Special Mint Set versions came out in an envelope from the U.S. Mint, but the 1965 Special Mint Set versions weren't made until 1966 either. So when you're looking for these coins, don't worry about being real confused about when they were made, how they were made, and why there wasn't any mint marks, because that was part of the deal in 1965. Congress didn't want people to collect these coins, so they did as much as they could to make sure that people didn't want to collect them. Well, that's all we have today from DC Coin World. We'd love to have you subscribe to our channel and leave any comments that you might have in the comments section. And feel free to look at some of our other videos on the 1965 coins, including the 1965 dime, penny, half dollar, and the 1965 quarter.